The AAC Report is brought to you by Blake Blahut of Realty One Group. Whether you're looking to buy your very first home or looking to downsize or upgrade, call Blake Blahut anytime at 407-748-0484. This is the AAC Report only on the Knightline Sports Network. I'm Jeff Allen. Thank you for listening. Hope you're staying safe and staying well. Coming up on this week's show, we talk to AAC Commissioner Mike Aresco about when sports came to a halt just before the men's basketball conference tournament, how and when college athletics might resume, moving forward with an 11-team conference with UConn's departure, and he shares some fun after-hours memories from his days at CBS. That's all next when the AAC Report continues in just a moment. Are you tired of the endless money pit of paying rent? Do you have a home you need to sell for top dollar? Talk to the Hometown Advantage award-winning real estate professional and fellow UCF Knight, Blake Blahut of Realty One Group. Blake has proven to produce results and a smooth process for his clients all across Central Florida. Whether you're looking to buy your very first home or looking to downsize or upgrade, talk to Blake Blahut. Visit him at his website, Blake'sOrlandoHomes.com, or contact him anytime at 407-748-0484. Again, Blake'sOrlandoHomes.com and 407-748-0484. Get the hometown advantage by working with Blake.
Raising the bar on what to expect from your personal injury attorney is our commitment to you at Chad Barr Law. I'm Chad Barr, and as a UCF alum, I am proud to present Knightline, the morning after show, Central Florida's only call-in show dedicated to our UCF Knights every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. And remember, if you or a loved one are injured in an auto accident, call us at 407-599-9036 to schedule your free consultation or visit us at chadbarlaw.com. Our clients come to us in need and leave as family. Offices Altamont Springs. Go Knights. Charge on.
And it is a pleasure to welcome to this week's show the Commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, Mike Aresco. Commissioner, besides the conference business at hand, how have you been personally handling the stay-at-home and virtual world we currently reside in?
Well, great to be with you, Jeff, and hope you and your family are staying well, and everyone in the community, all your listeners. Working remotely is a little different. We've all been doing it, and I think, reasonably successfully. We have Zoom, of course, and to be honest, conference calls would be enough for me. I don't know that I necessarily need to see, everyone on Zoom, but it's worked fine. And we've kept in touch with the conference office, which is, it's still closed, and we don't plan to reopen it at the moment. Things are, easing up, in Rhode Island, but we're not quite there yet. But it's been a new experience for everyone, and I think it's probably going to change to some extent the way a lot of businesses do business. I don't know that, we have an office move, Jeff, coming up, and we're moving to Dallas, and we think that will work very well for us. It's a good place to be, and I like the idea of having an office. I like the personal contact. Obviously, for a little while, if we do get into the office, it's going to be social distancing and other kinds of things, of course. But once we get back to normal, I think it'd be good to have an office. But for a lot of businesses, they may not feel that way. But it's worked out well.
Well, that's good, and we're glad to know that you're staying well and staying safe and all that good stuff. Let's go back just a brief moment when the sports world came to a halt in mid-March. The NBA suspended their season when Rudy Gobert tested positive the day prior to the start of the AAC tournament, which was then canceled just prior to the beginning. Was suspending the tournament and eventually all sports one of those that kind of go into both categories? An easy decision, knowing public safety was paramount, but a hard one at the same time, knowing the impact to the student athletes?
I think that's a good way to put it. It was a hard decision, and yet it was a decision we had to make. So in that sense, I guess you could say it was easy. But yes, we did think that we're depriving our student athletes of a once in a lifetime experience for some of them, especially the seniors. And it wasn't taken lightly, but we felt that we couldn't really defend playing. It's funny, that situation developed. Hemingway once said about somebody going bankrupt, it was gradual and then sudden. There were signs that we might have an issue because, as you know, we were starting to take extra precautions. But we thought, the the virus was still low risk. We've been, hearing that obviously from the various governmental agencies. And then, of course, the NBA had the case of Rudy Gobert, and we all decided that, it's just not, it's not something we thought we could do, putting our kids in harm's way. And it was the right decision, but it was a hard decision, as you said. Not something you wanted to do, but you had to do it.
And there's a lot of speculation and discussion on when sports will resume. How much will you be watching and observing professional sports as they navigate coming back?
Quite a bit, actually, Jeff, although we've been doing our own research. I've spent probably the last 2 months pretty much dealing with how we would return to play, with health and safety being the paramount concern. That's it trumps everything, keeping our student athletes and anyone connected with the games safe. And we've looked at all sorts of things. We've looked at all sorts of best practices relative to this. We've identified a lot of questions, and we don't have a lot of answers yet. But to answer your question, we will definitely be looking hard at the pro leagues and seeing what they do and how successful they can do this if they do come back. Obviously, baseball's got some plans to come back. Don't know yet about the NBA, UFC, I guess the Ultimate Fighting, which I don't typically watch that, but I understand they did come back, and we'll see how that works out. The issues, of course, are going to be, what happens if somebody tests positive. I think you have to have a testing protocol in place, and that remains to be seen whether the pro leagues will have, sufficient and accurate testing, and that they won't be depriving any frontline, responders in the community of tests that they might need. That's one of the concerns we've had, and I think by the time we start up in the fall, if we do, I'm confident that we will start up, I think we'll have a good testing protocol in place, and I think we'll have an abundance of tests, and so we won't be depriving anybody of them, and we hope that by then the accuracy will be close to 100%. I don't know that anything in this world is 100%, but we're going to watch carefully what the pro leagues do, because we're trying to take best practices from everywhere we can, and that's been really a priority the last few months. It's like Groundhog Day, Jeff. Mm-hmm. Every day we've gone over many of the same things, but it's a good process because you do pick up things as you go along, and you pick up some ideas, and you also identify problems that you didn't even think existed. Every time we think we solved a potential issue, it begs 10 more questions. So that's basically what we've been dealing with.
And how much are you in communication with your conference counterparts?
Quite a bit. We've had conference calls regularly with the G5 football commissioners, and also we've had calls with the P5 commissioners. We had some CFP meetings earlier in the month, college football playoff, in which all FBS commissioners were involved. We've had regular twice weekly calls with the 32 commissioners of the 32 Division I conferences, FBS, FCS, and Division I basketball conferences. So we've been in pretty constant touch with them, and we've been trading ideas, and we've been talking about issues. We're all going to obviously try to be on the same page if we get a green light to return to play. We're not sure what that green light's going to mean, but we have been coordinating and doing as much as we can in terms of getting best practices from each other. So it's definitely been an ongoing process. In addition, we've had calls with our own conference regularly with our athletic directors, and also we've had calls with our president. So we're trying to keep everyone in the loop, and we're trying to communicate with everyone. Communication in a situation like this is really, really, obviously probably goes without saying, but it's really, really important.
And you also kind of hit the nail on the head, too. The pro leagues, they have a set number, a controlled environment of teams, whether it's 30 or 32. With college athletics, and we're talking a multitude of sports, and you're talking a multitude levels of divisions, it's got to be quite daunting to kind of figure out how all that's going to come together to get started, wouldn't you think?
I think so, and it's always possible that we could be surprised and things will go relatively smoothly, but I wouldn't necessarily, think that that's going to happen. We've got a much more complex situation. As you know, we have 130 schools that play FBS football in obviously all 50 states. We've got, I'm not sure we have a team in Alaska, so maybe I'm wrong about that, but we certainly do in Hawaii. But, when you look at the situation, Jeff, you're going to be, you don't know who's going to make the decision to restart. And therein lies, a major issue for all of us. What if some states say they're open and you can play and other states say no? We heard from California where possibly they might not permit competitions, and maybe it's just competitions with fans, maybe no fans. But, there is a concern that California might not give the green light, or it might give it later than other states. What do you do then? What if some schools can play and others can't? Do you start your season? We have 11 teams going into this year. If a couple of teams are in hot spots and can't play, for example, if they're in coronavirus hotspots, well, do you play with 10 schools? Do you play with 9 schools? Do you start the season? Does everyone start the season at the same time? What if some leagues can't start as early? We're all competing for those college football playoff and New Year's Day spots. How is that going to be affected by the way the season goes? How is your own conference going to be affected if, in fact, you end up with some quarantines and teams have to miss games, and you end up with a checkerboard schedule? And how do you deal with tiebreakers in that regard when some people have played a different number of conference games? We're not even sure about the non-conference schedule. We want Notre Dame to play football and Army and others, and so therefore you have to leave some room for non-conference games. That's going to be an issue. But the fact that we're such a large enterprise and a national enterprise, but also we're federated really. We're obviously each conference often makes its own decisions. I'm not sure whether conferences, Jeff, are going to have the discretion to start on their own once the governmental agencies say it is okay. Obviously, if you can take guidance from the Presidential Task Force, from the CDC, from the state and local governments as well, and if they give us a green light, whatever that green light might be, we're not sure how green is going to be, but if we get a signal to start, certain conferences may be able to do certain things and others may not. And so it could be very interesting. We're just not sure yet what's going to happen.
Yeah, and that was actually going to be my next question. Do you see scenarios where not all conferences are playing at the same time?
I could see that scenario. I could see it if in fact, for instance, in our conference or in, let's just throw out the SEC, if everybody in all the schools in our states or their states are playing, and yet in other conferences, certain states are not allowing teams to play, I could see our conference or other conferences playing. Now, we don't know yet, and it's all hypothetical at this point. But, again, I think it's going to be we think that conferences will have a certain level of discretion. We just don't know yet. But, you have to look at that and start thinking about it. And that's what I mentioned earlier. You're identifying questions. You don't necessarily have answers yet, but we will have answers. We've got to have answers because ultimately you have to make decisions. And if, in fact, that kind of situation could present itself as we get into August and September, then you've got to deal with it because a lot hinges on whether you play or not, and especially if you can do it safely. That's really the only issue. In fact, it is the issue. I mean, you have to be able to do it safely, and if you can, then and others can't, then the question is, do you play when perhaps other conferences can't? I hope it doesn't come to that, and I hope the governors can develop a consensus so we can all start, or there might be a situation where maybe none of us should start, but I don't think that's going to happen at this point. This has been a really tough situation, and you don't know what's going to happen with this virus, and so everything we say now is obviously subject to change. But we are getting more information, weekly. Obviously, states are starting to reopen, assuming that there is no, second wave of this, and who knows. I think we'll be in a position where we will have testing and we'll be able to keep our student athletes safe. Now, there are other issues that arise. If campuses aren't open, can we play? Well, if the campus is closed, we're not going to play football or fall sports. But if the campus is open, there are some students on the campus, may not be all the students, There may be a lot of virtual classes, and some schools may go completely virtual. The question is, can you play football then? Well, again, if you can protect your football players and officials and staff and people associated with the game, and maybe you won't have fans in the arena, then that's a discussion where it's an ongoing discussion. We think at that point perhaps you could play because it's an extension of the educational mission. You have online classes going on. But I think the more realistic scenario is most campuses, Jeff, will have people on campus, will have students on campus, maybe not all of them. And if that's the case, then I see no reason why you can't play football, assuming, again, the safety protocols are in place and observed.
And, of course, I'm sure you've had discussions with TV and media partners as well as other commissioners in relation to those kind of things. Do you see situations where, there may be some alterations in the media agreements?
It's possible, depending on whether we lose games, and that's always an issue. But on the other hand, we've lost some games to Hurricanes over the last few years, and there haven't really been any adjustments, in the contract. The ESPN people, and we have a major new deal starting with ESPN next year, this coming year, and we've had a deal with ESPN in the past. They've been great partners. They've been terrific. We've talked to them about different scenarios. They put no pressure on us whatsoever. They want to make sure it's safe to play. And if we lose games, then we'd have to see whether there are any adjustments needed. Now, we did lose our basketball tournament, and so we'll sit down with ESPN at some point, determine what we're going to do about that. But if you lose a handful of football games, it may not be the end of the world. It may not even, again, I don't want to negotiate with ESPN in public. I have no idea what might happen if we lose games. But I can just tell you, in the past, we have had a few games lost because of hurricanes, and that may happen again. If a season is delayed or truncated, there might be some TV implications. If you lose a lot of games, if you lose half your season or more, that would obviously have implications. If you ultimately can't play in the fall, but maybe can play in the spring, and that's the elephant in the room. Nobody really knows whether that's even feasible, but it's something that you'd have to look at if you couldn't play in the fall. How would that affect TV, and how would that affect other sports that are being televised at the same time? So there are a lot of questions that could arise. That issue, the spring football, I don't want to overstate that because it's really a back burner issue right now. We think we can open in the fall. In fact, we have every reason to think right now that we could potentially open when we're planning, when the original schedule was going to start, and that would be in late August. Now, again, there may be no fans. It's always possible that if you can there are certain safeguards you can take to have certain number of fans in the arena that you can do it in the stadiums. We don't know yet. Obviously these states that are reopening are allowing restaurants to reopen with 25% or 50% of capacity, and then hoping to go from there if the virus can be contained. And we don't know whether that's even possible with fans at this point. But we're going to focus on our teams, our players. And it's complicated, Jeff. You've got travel, and you've got hotels, and you've got meals, and you've got all sorts of different kinds of hygiene. There's a lot going into this that would have to be taken care of if you're gonna play. It's not just testing the kids and have them run out on the field. As you know, there's a lot of logistical items that you have to deal with. And that's going to be a real challenge for us. And that's why we're trying to get ahead of this. We're trying to anticipate all the questions. We have a medical advisory group in our conference, and we have doctors from around our conference. We're fortunate that we're associated with a lot of medical centers. UCF has one, USF. Tulane has a nationally recognized medical center, which also has dealt in tropical diseases and has some experience in this kind of thing. We've got the Department of Defense will be working with the Naval Academy on their testing, and so we're going to get some great input from them. So we're very fortunate. We're in big cities. We have access to labs that can help us with our testing protocols. And I think on testing, I think we will be on our own to some extent. I don't think it's going to be micromanaged on any kind of national level. So we're going to have to be prepared, and we will be. It's just that right now, we have a lot of questions, and we've identified them, and maybe there'll even be more that come out of our ongoing conversations, but we will eventually have answers.
Besides the benchmarks and guidance from the governments and public safety officials, et cetera, are there any other special criteria that you feel is important to be met for the football season to get underway?
I think the main one is how safe can we make the competition for everyone involved and anyone in the building, and testing is going to be critical in that regard, no question. And right now there's disagreement about the tests and how reliable and accurate some of them are, how quickly you can get them, and when you should test. Do you test Thursday before teams get on the bus or the plane? Do you test Saturday just before the game? What happens if somebody tests positive? Those are the kinds of questions that we're going to have to answer. But in terms of the protocols, we've got to, we think there is a way to play safely, and then we're going to have to gauge in terms of if somebody tests positive, well, what do you do? Do you quarantine an entire team? Do you quarantine a team that played against a team with the positive, or maybe it's an official, maybe it's an event personnel individual, maybe it's a coach. What do you do? Do you feel that you don't have to necessarily quarantine the whole team? I don't know. And the minute you even start talking about that, you sometimes get accused of, well, you're willing to take a risk with the health and well-being of the student athletes. And that's not the case at all. It's just in everything you do in life, what level of risk are you willing to tolerate? We tolerate a certain risk of catastrophic injury in football. It's always possible, and that's why we want to make sure when our student athletes do come back that they have enough time to get ready and acclimate themselves to the game, because it's obviously the roughest game, and you don't want to have catastrophic injuries because you were so focused on the coronavirus. But in terms of the coronavirus, we have to make sure we've got a safe environment. And the question then becomes, again, how accurate is our testing going to be, how widespread, how, we're going to enforce all sorts of hygienic measures. And if you do that, you do the best you can, then, if something happens, you have to deal with it. But, that's really the goal. And the whole focus, Jeff, has been the health and well-being and safety of the anybody involved with the game, obviously primarily the student athletes, but the coaches, anybody involved in the games, if we in fact are able to play them, and that's going to remain. And while there are financial implications to what we're doing, they have been, I can tell you this categorically, they have been completely secondary. It's all been about health and safety, and in terms of the finances, whatever we end up doing, we'll just have to pick up the pieces and do the best we can with the finances, but we're not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize the health and safety of our players.
From an economic standpoint, football obviously is the major revenue stream for athletic departments. To what lengths will be taken to have a season for the financial health of those schools and all their athletics?
Well, it's a good question, and I think the length is going to be, can you ensure health and safety? Can you ensure a safe environment with using best practices? That's really it in a nutshell, because you want to play. Everybody, the student athletes want to play. We all want a season. Obviously there are major financial implications if you don't have a season, but regardless of those implications, if you can't, again, as I said earlier, ensure the health and safety of participants, then you're not going to play. It's that simple. And that's, in terms of what lengths you go, well, first of all, you do try to develop every kind of safeguard and protective measure. You do everything you can to make sure you have the most sophisticated testing, because if you don't do any of that, then you're not going to be in a position to have your games resume, and we all want them to resume. So you're going to do everything possible to make sure that the health and safety standards are sufficient. And then beyond that, there's really not much more you can do. But that's going to determine where we are. And the virus is going to determine some things, and Dr. Fauci's talked about that. Depending on whether we get control of this, depending on whether there are new outbreaks, depending on whether we have treatments for it, we might have some treatments soon that could really alleviate the situation. As you know, the age group 18 to 22 or 23 or whatever is really it's not risk free, but the vast, that age group would probably have, the fewest problems, but that doesn't, we don't want them to get the virus, obviously. But there is always, I suppose, some level of risk in anything you do. If you close things down, then maybe you don't have any risk, but you might find risk in other areas if you close things down. Who knows? And so we're going to try to take a measured, prudent approach. And as I said, and then we've talked a little before, we're going to look at all the leagues. We're going to look at all the government guidance that we can find from CDC, from the Presidential Task Force, from the NCAA's Medical Advisory Committee, and we've got a medical advisory board of really competent people from our schools, including a number of doctors. So we're going to take whatever they say to heart and see if we can't figure this out. And if we can't, we can't.
So going into this season, the AAC moves forward as an 11-team conference with UConn's departure for the Big East. Now, with the sports interruption notwithstanding, where do things stand on when considering to possibly re-add a 12th member?
We're thinking about it, and down the road we may well do that. But right now there's no urgency. We've got a couple of years in which we can play with 11 and have the top two teams play in our championship game. We have a waiver from the NCAA to play with 11 for 2 years, and we might get a third year because legislation to make that change permanent is being held up because of the coronavirus crisis. A lot of legislation has been put on the back burner, so we might be able to petition the NCAA for a third year where we could play at 11 teams. So there's no urgency, but I've made it clear that we would prefer to be at 12 because it's just better. We like playing in divisions. We liked having the additional inventory for ESPN. It helped us with our Thursday, Friday schedules. It helped us with our bye dates. So it would be better if we eventually had 12. But, I didn't want to rile up the college community either and act as though we were ready to raid conferences. Again, there are some teams that might be attractive to our league, and they might be attractive to us. We don't know. But it's not something right now that we're worried about because we can play at 11. We've got a really strong league. It will be different. We keep thinking in terms of divisions still in our own minds because we've had divisions for the last 5 or 6 years. But we'll have a good schedule if we play, and we'll have our top two teams playing in the championship game, which in some ways might benefit us because when you have divisions, you might have one division that's weaker than the other, and the record of the team coming out in the championship game is not as good. Now, if that team upsets the team with the better record, then we probably sacrifice our chance to be on New Year's Day. The G5 has a peculiar rule that says, the representative of the G5 has to be a conference champion. It can't just be the highest-ranked CFP team. And you could have a situation where somebody goes undefeated, loses a championship game, but still is the highest-ranked CFP team, and they can't go to a New Year's Day bowl unless they are in the top 12 and would go in any event. And in our situation, it's very hard to get into the top 12, especially with a loss. So you really count on winning your championship. That's the way you can go. And so consequently, we have if you have your two best teams playing with your two best records, with no divisions, then whoever wins might actually be the team that frankly goes to the championship. Now we happen to be in that position to the New Year's Day game. We were in that position a few years ago when Memphis and UCF came in undefeated. Memphis had a loss, and it was to UCF. And whoever won that game was going to go to New Year's Day. And you probably, again, as I said, have a somewhat better chance if you take your top two teams. But we have a rough schedule, and people are going to be playing each other. That's the one thing about an 11-team schedule. You probably have some of your best teams playing each other, whereas in divisional play they might miss each other from time to time, like UCF missed Memphis last year after playing them the previous couple of years. So it's a mixed bag, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Well, Commissioner, before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about the All About Us Club that used to convene at the famed Ben Benson Steakhouse in New York City in your CBS days. Now, Mr. Benson passed away recently, and his establishment hosted the CBS crew after SEC coverage on Saturdays, the likes of Tim Brando, You and Your Wife, Tony Barnhart, Spencer Tillman, Phil Fulmer, Archie and Olivia Manning, Jason Horowitz, Aaron Taylor. That's quite a list of all-stars there. Can you relate what your fondest memory is from those get-togethers?
We had such a great time. How did you know all this, Jeff? That's pretty remarkable. I know there was an article recently in the New York Times about Ben Benson passing away, and I know Tim Brando did some tweeting.
Yes, that's where I got it.
That's a pretty remarkable recollection you have there. Those 10 or 12 years when I was working at CBS as a programmer for SEC football, and we had Tim Brando and Spencer doing the studio show, and we had Tony Barnhart involved in the studio as well, and we had Archie Manning is one of our guests in the studio, guest commentators in the studio, and he was a regular for a while. We would get together. Ben hosted us, but we paid for it. This wasn't a question of the restaurant paying for anything. we would go there, and every Saturday after the SEC game, and we had some great years then in the SEC and the decade from 2000. Well, it goes all the way from really the turn of the century on, when we started doing this. We did it for a number of years. We would gather at Ben's after the game, and we'd get a table they had a bar to the right of the restaurant, and there were tables in the bar, and you could have dinner. And they would always have a table set up for us, and we never knew quite how many were in the group because we had guests. A couple of times we had Shepard Smith from Fox News, who's a big Ole Miss fan. He's a grad football fan, and Tim Brando knew him. We had Mr. Belvedere once from the sitcom, Mr. Belvedere. He came. He happened to know one of our, I don't know whether he knew Spencer or Tim. We had other guests. Phil Fulmer was there from time to time, David Pollock. Just a great, it was always a great time. And my wife came. She was probably, because I lived in New York, or I lived nearby, she was the only spouse who was able to be there, and she was like our mascot, and everybody loved having her there. And she really loved it because she would sit next to Spencer, and I'd sit next to Tim on the other side. And the great thing was there's a TV in the corner of that bar, and Jimmy O'Brien, who was the maitre d' at the time, a wonderful man. He's passed away since then, but a great sports fan, and knew us, knew all of us. And then Ben Benson, of course, and then we got to know the bartenders and the waiters. They got to know us, and it was almost like a family kind of atmosphere when we came in on Saturday night. It's something we look forward to. And they'd give us the remote control, and we could put whatever games we wanted, all the games at night. And those games usually had an impact on what we were doing. We'd watch an Southwest Conference anymore, Big 12, and we'd watch a Pac-12 game, and those games had impact on what we were doing with the SEC. So we took a real interest in those. We had great meals, and in terms of memories, that plaque that Tim tweeted out a picture of a plaque that Ben had made and put at the table where we always sat. That plaque was actually stolen, believe it or not. Somebody must have gotten in there with a screwdriver and took it out of the wall. And we kidded Tim that it was because his name was on it. But it probably was because Archie Manning's name was on it. We're not really sure. Certainly nobody would have known who I was. But the point is, I have to tell you, of all the things I've done in my career that were fun, that might be close to the top of the list. We all liked each other. We all had a wonderful time. I'll never forget, the NFL studio crew rehearsed on Saturday, and they would go to Ben Benson's as well, and they would go earlier. They got through earlier. Our games didn't end till around 7 o'clock Eastern time, and their rehearsals ended earlier. So they would often be leaving when we were coming in, and I'll never forget Dan Marino coming over to me once and saying, we all really, really envy you guys. We think you guys all really, really enjoy what you're doing, and it's just, you guys have such a good time. We just think it's great, and we're the same way. We've got a good group. We like being with each other, and when we see you guys and the enthusiasm for college football, and I'll never forget, Dan came by one night on the way out, and there was a little fellow at the bar. He must have been about 10 years old, and he kept looking at him, and I said, I've got to tell Dan this youngster probably would love to have him come over. And Dan, gracious as ever, he went over, he tousled the kid's hair and said some nice things to him, and maybe even signed an autograph for him. And one time, Spencer Tillman had a Super Bowl ring, because he won a Super Bowl with the 49ers, and one of the kids came by and for some reason was introduced to our group and saw the ring, and Spencer took it off and let him wear it for a few minutes, and it was a big thrill for that youngster. And there were a lot of memories like that. And Archie Manning and Olivia, Archie's the most unpretentious guy in the world. He never was looking for attention. People would come over to him, they'd want to say hello. He was always gracious, but he was never looking for that kind of attention. This was not a flamboyant kind of thing. It was just, we just all had a lot of fun. And, again, when Ben passed away recently, I saw the article and Tim tweeted and shared thoughts. It brought back so many fond memories of those dinners, and it was a tradition. We did it pretty much every Saturday night during the football season for I don't know how many years. And probably had other stories too from those days, but again. We'll have to raise a toast to Ben and also Jimmy O'Brien, who was, again, the maitre d', who was an animating presence at Ben's for many years. Ben closed the restaurant, I don't know how many years ago, and we all missed it because I still got to New York from time to time for business, and and Ben's was literally right across the street from CBS where I worked, so I would often go over there and have lunch. Many of us would go over and just have lunch at the bar. We'd have a hamburger or whatever, and so you really got to know the people there, and it was a unique place. It wasn't your typical steakhouse, and it wasn't your typical restaurant. It really became an institution for the 30 or 40 years that it existed.
Well, Commissioner, we thank you for sharing those memories, and we also thank you for your time this evening, and we wish you nothing but the best, and obviously lots of things that are going to be happening between now and the time sports resumes, and we wish you the best in getting all that done.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Appreciated all the really good questions. Obviously, you know what we're dealing with, and again, I hope you and your family stay well, stay healthy. Same with all your listeners and everyone, obviously around the country, of course. But we hope that. I actually am able to travel down to Orlando this year. We never know what's going to happen. But thanks for having me, and again, best wishes to all.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you, Commissioner, and you stay healthy as well. And we'll be back to wrap up this week's program in just a moment.
Hello, Night Nation. This is Andrew Fagley, reminding you to tune in every Sunday morning at our new time, 10 to 11 a.m. on ESPN 580 Orlando for Knightline the Morning After, brought to you by Chad Barlaw. We'll be taking your calls and your texts reacting to the previous week's UCF sports action, and you never know who will show up. Once again, that's Knightline the Morning After, every Sunday morning, 10 to 11 a.m. on ESPN 580 Orlando or TuneIn Radio. Go Knights and charge on.
Night Nation, this is Adam, one half of the dynamic duo that is the Sons of UCF, which is found only on the Knightline Sports Network. Join UCF Mike and I each week as we bring you some of the latest from in and around UCF sports, including such great segments as the Josh Heupel Translator, Top 8 Lists, and Cow of the Week. We'll also bring you some of the most in-depth and unique interviews with some of your favorite former Knights. You don't want to miss a moment, so make sure you subscribe to the Knightline Sports Network wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll take care of the rest. Go Knights. Charge on.
As we pull things to a close on this week's show, we give you our usual reminders to please follow me on Twitter at JeffAllen_88 and check out my personal podcast at JeffAllenSportsTalk.com. Also, please like and share all of our Knightline Sports Network programming on social media and where you get your podcast, and share the content in social media of those who participate on our programs. They help us, we help them. This has been the AAC Report only on the Knightline Sports Network. I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy and stay well.